The day that changed everything started like any other Tuesday morning in our suburban Chicago home, except it wasn't supposed to be just any Tuesday. It was supposed to be my birthday. My name is Sarah Chen, and I'm writing this story 3 years after what I now call the birthday that broke everything, the day my own family's indifference taught me that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you most are the ones who see you least. But more importantly, it was the day I discovered that being invisible to your family can actually be the greatest gift they never meant to give you. I was turning 19 that Tuesday, October 15, 2019. I had been looking forward to this birthday for months, not because I expected some grand celebration, but because I hoped, foolishly, as it turned out, that my family would finally acknowledge that I existed as more than just the background noise in their lives. Our house in Naperville was one of those cookie-cutter suburban homes that looked perfect from the outside but felt cold and fractured on the inside. My parents, Dr. Michael Chen and Dr. Linda Chen, were both successful cardiologists who ran their own practice downtown. They had built what everyone else saw as the perfect American dream life: big house, luxury cars, successful careers, and 2 daughters who were supposed to represent their legacy. The problem was, they only seemed to remember they had one daughter most of the time. That daughter was my sister Emma, 2 years younger than me, blonde, thanks to expensive highlights that our parents paid for without question, bubbly, and everything that I apparently wasn't. Where I was quiet and introspective, Emma was loud and demanding. Where I got good grades through hours of solitary study, Emma coasted on charm and the assumption that her smile could fix anything it broke. Where I had learned to be self-sufficient and invisible, Emma had learned that the squeaky wheel gets not just the grease, but the whole garage. I woke up that Tuesday morning with a flutter of nervous excitement in my stomach. Despite years of disappointment, some small part of me still believed that this year would be different. Maybe this year, my parents would remember without prompting. Maybe this year, I wouldn't have to hint and hope and eventually remind them that I existed enough to have been born 19 years ago. I came downstairs to the kitchen at 7:30 a.m., the same time I always did, and found my mother standing at the granite island with her back to me, scrolling through her phone while drinking coffee from her favorite mug, the one that said, "World's Best Mom," that Emma had given her last Mother's Day. "Good morning, Mom," I said, putting a little extra brightness in my voice, hoping she might hear something special in the day. "Morning, honey," she replied without looking up from her phone. "There's cereal in the pantry. I've got early rounds at the hospital, so I won't be home until late." I stood there for a moment, waiting for recognition to dawn on her face, for her to suddenly remember what day it was, for her to look at me with that warm smile she reserved for Emma's achievements and say, "Happy birthday, sweetheart." Instead, she grabbed her travel mug, kissed the air somewhere in my general direction, and headed for the garage door. "Tell Emma I left money on the counter for her lunch," she called over her shoulder. "She's got that student council meeting after school." The door slammed shut, and I was alone in the kitchen with the faint scent of her expensive perfume and the crushing realization that my own mother had just walked out on my birthday without so much as a flicker of recognition. I tried to tell myself it was still early. Dad would remember. He had to remember. My father came downstairs 20 minutes later, already dressed in his perfectly pressed scrubs, phone pressed to his ear as he talked to someone about surgical schedules. He grabbed an apple from the fruit bowl, spotted me sitting at the kitchen table with my bowl of cereal, and gave me a distracted wave. "Dad," I started, when he paused his phone conversation. "What is it, Sarah?" "I'm running late for surgery." "It's just, today is." But he was already back on his phone, heading for the door. "Sarah, whatever it is, can it wait until tonight? I've got 3 procedures today and a consultation that's going to run long." And then he was gone too, leaving me sitting alone at our big, expensive kitchen table, staring at a bowl of cereal that suddenly tasted like cardboard and disappointment. The worst part wasn't even that they forgot. The worst part was that I wasn't surprised. This was the pattern of my life, existing in the spaces between their attention to Emma. I was the reliable one, the one who didn't need anything, the one who took care of herself so efficiently that they had apparently forgotten I was still a child who sometimes needed to be remembered and celebrated. Emma came downstairs around 8:15, already dressed in the outfit she'd spent 20 minutes agonizing over the night before, a designer crop top and jeans that probably cost more than I spent on clothes in 6 months. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, and she radiated the kind of confidence that comes from never doubting that you're the most important person in any room. "Morning," Sarah, she said cheerfully, grabbing a yogurt from the fridge. God, I'm so tired. Jessica's party went way later than I expected last night. Thank God Mom let me stay out past curfew. I watched her move around the kitchen with the easy grace of someone who had never had to question whether she belonged there, whether she mattered, whether anyone would notice if she disappeared. Part of me envied that confidence. Most of me resented it. Emma, I said carefully, do you know what today is? She paused, spoon halfway to her mouth, and looked at me with those blue eyes that were exactly like Mom's. For a moment, I thought maybe she would remember. Maybe my little sister, for all her self-absorption, would be the one person in my family who cared enough to mark the anniversary of my existence. Tuesday, she said, looking genuinely confused. Why? Are we supposed to have some kind of family thing today? Because I've got student council after school, and then Tyler's picking me up for dinner. The hope that had been flickering in my chest finally died completely. No, I said quietly. No family thing. Good, she said, already focused on her phone as she scrolled through Instagram. Because Tyler's taking me to that new sushi place downtown, and I've been dying to try it. I sat there watching my sister, my beautiful, popular, beloved sister, plan her evening while completely oblivious to the fact that she was discussing her date plans on my birthday. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. For 19 years, I had been the understanding one. The mature one. The one who didn't make waves or demands or scenes. I had convinced myself that being low maintenance was a virtue, that not needing attention was somehow noble. But sitting there, watching Emma live her effortlessly charmed life while I marked my birthday alone, I realized that being forgotten wasn't noble. It was just sad. The school day passed in a blur of classes where teachers asked about homework and tests but no one asked about birthdays. I had hoped maybe one of my friends would remember, but the truth was, I didn't have the kind of close friendships where people remembered details like that. I was friendly with lots of people but close to very few. It was easier that way, less chance for disappointment when they inevitably prioritized someone more interesting. I came home around 4 p.m. to find the house empty except for our housekeeper, Maria, who was loading the dishwasher. Maria had worked for our family for 5 years, and she was one of the few people who actually seemed to see me as more than just Emma's older sister. Hola, Sarah, she said with her warm smile. How was school today? Fine, I said, dropping my backpack by the door. Thanks for asking. She studied my face with the kind of attention my own parents rarely gave me. You look sad today, Mija. Everything okay? For a moment, I considered telling her. Maria might remember. Maria might care. But the words stuck in my throat. How do you explain to someone that your own family forgot you existed enough to be born? Just tired, I said instead. Around 6 p.m., Emma burst through the front door like a small, blonde hurricane. She was practically glowing with excitement, chattering on her phone about her upcoming date while simultaneously texting someone else. This was Emma's natural state, the center of multiple attention streams at once. Mom, she called out as she headed up the stairs. Tyler's picking me up at 7. I need to change. Your mother's not home yet, I called from the living room where I was trying to focus on homework. Then where is she? Emma appeared in the doorway, looking genuinely confused by the concept that our mother might not be immediately available to solve her problems. Still at the hospital. She said she'd be late. Emma frowned. This was clearly not acceptable. But I need to ask her about borrowing her car tomorrow. Jessica's car is in the shop, and we're supposed to go shopping for homecoming dresses. You could text her, I suggested. I did. She's not answering. Emma flopped dramatically onto the couch next to me. This is so annoying. Why is she always working when I need her? I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and felt something cold settle in my stomach. Here she was, complaining that our mother wasn't available for immediate consultation about her social plans, on the day that same mother had forgotten my birthday entirely. Emma, I said slowly, when's the last time you think Mom or Dad forgot something important about you? She looked at me like I'd asked when the last time she'd forgotten to breathe. What do you mean? They don't forget things about me. I mean, sometimes Dad misses dinner because of surgery, but that's different. Right, I said. That's different. She must have heard something in my tone because she actually looked at me properly for the first time that day. Why are you being weird? What's wrong with you? Nothing's wrong with me, Emma. I'm just observing. Observing what? Before I could answer, we heard Dad's car in the driveway. Emma immediately perked up, her momentary attention to me forgotten as she realized she could now get the parental guidance she needed for her evening plans. Dad came through the door looking tired but pleased. He'd had a successful day of surgery, and it showed in his stride. Girls, he called out cheerfully. How are my daughters? Dad. Emma practically launched herself at him. I need to ask you something. Tyler's taking me to dinner tonight, and then we're going to see that new movie, and Mom's not answering her phone, and I need to know if I can borrow her car tomorrow because... And just like that, Dad's attention was completely absorbed by Emma's rapid-fire recounting of her social calendar. I watched from the couch as he listened with the kind of focused attention that I couldn't remember ever receiving. He asked follow-up questions about her plans, offered advice about curfew times, and even slipped her an extra 20 for emergencies. I had been sitting right there when he walked in. He had seen me. But in the 30 minutes that followed, as Emma monopolized his attention with the minutiae of her teenage social life, he never once looked my way again. By 7 p.m., when Tyler arrived to pick up Emma for their date, I had reached a state of numbness that was almost peaceful. I had moved beyond disappointment into a kind of anthropological fascination with my own family. How was it possible for 3 people to live in the same house as me and be so completely unaware of my existence that they could collectively forget the day I was born? Tyler was exactly the kind of boy you'd expect Emma to date, tall, athletic, with the kind of effortless charm that came from never having to work for attention. He shook Dad's hand with perfect politeness and complimented Mom, who had finally arrived home, on her beautiful home. He was every parent's dream of what they wanted their daughter to date. You kids have fun, Mom said, straightening Emma's hair unnecessarily. Be home by 11. 11:30? Emma negotiated with the expertise of someone who had never heard the word no and meant it. Fine. 11:30. But text me when you get to the restaurant. I watched this exchange from the kitchen doorway, marveling at the choreographed perfection of it all. The caring parents, the responsible boyfriend, the cherished daughter heading out for an evening of age-appropriate fun with appropriate supervision and appropriate curfews. It was like watching a Norman Rockwell painting come to life, except I was somehow both in the picture and completely absent from it. After Emma left, Mom and Dad settled into their evening routine, Mom opening a bottle of wine while Dad scrolled through medical journals on his tablet. They sat together on the couch, comfortable in their silence, looking like the successful couple they were. How was your day? Mom asked Dad, curling up next to him with her wine glass. Good. 3 successful procedures, and the Johnson consultation went well. I think we're looking at surgery next week. He looked up from his tablet. How about you? Busy. We had that conference call with the pharmaceutical reps, and then Mrs. Patterson came in for her follow-up. She's doing well post-surgery. They talked about their work, their patients, their professional lives. They were clearly comfortable with each other, clearly a team. They were good people doing important work, saving lives and helping families. And they had completely forgotten that 19 years ago, they had created a life that was sitting 15 feet away from them, marking its birthday in silence. I stayed in the kitchen, listening to their comfortable conversation, waiting for one of them to suddenly look up and remember. Waiting for that moment of recognition, that flash of guilt, that hurried apology and attempt to make it right. But it never came. At 9 p.m., I quietly went upstairs to my room and closed the door. I sat on my bed, surrounded by the evidence of 19 years of existing, my books, my art supplies, my small collection of treasures accumulated over the years, and finally let myself feel the full weight of what had happened. My family had forgotten my birthday. Not overlooked it, not gotten confused about the date, not been too busy to celebrate properly. They had forgotten it completely. Forgotten that I had been born 19 years ago today. Forgotten that this day was supposed to matter to someone, even if that someone was just me. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through social media, seeing posts from classmates celebrating their own birthdays with family dinners and surprise parties and cakes with candles. I saw Emma's Instagram story, full of pictures from her dinner with Tyler, her perfect makeup, her bright smile, her obvious joy in being exactly where she wanted to be with exactly who she wanted to be with. And for the first time in my life, I let myself be angry. Really, truly angry. Not hurt or disappointed or resigned, but furious. I was furious at my parents for being so absorbed in their own lives and Emma's drama that they couldn't be bothered to remember that they had another daughter. I was furious at Emma for being so effortlessly the center of attention that she had never once had to consider what it felt like to be forgotten. I was furious at myself for accepting this treatment, for being so understanding and undemanding that my own family had learned they could ignore me without consequence. But mostly, I was furious at the waste of it all. The waste of 19 years spent trying to be the perfect daughter, the easy daughter, the daughter who didn't need anything. The waste of all the times I had celebrated Emma's achievements while my own went unnoticed. The waste of all the energy I had spent trying to earn love that should have been freely given. That's when I remembered the gift. 3 weeks earlier, I had been walking through downtown Chicago when I passed a jewelry store having an estate sale. In the window, I had seen the most beautiful vintage pearl necklace, the kind of elegant, timeless piece that my mother would absolutely love. It was expensive, probably more than I should have spent, but I had been saving money from my part-time job at the campus bookstore for months. I had bought it as an early Christmas gift for my mother, but as I looked at it that day, I realized I wanted to give it to her for my birthday instead. I wanted to surprise her with something beautiful, something that would show her how much I appreciated her, how much I wanted to make her happy. I had this fantasy that maybe it would be the gesture that finally made her see me, really see me, as more than just the daughter who didn't need attention. The necklace was still in my closet, wrapped in the beautiful box the jeweler had provided, waiting for what I had imagined would be the perfect moment to present it. But as I sat there on my forgotten birthday, I realized that moment was never going to come. Not because of bad timing or wrong circumstances, but because my mother would never see me the way I wanted her to see me. She would never prioritize me the way she prioritized Emma. She would never remember my special days the way she remembered Emma's. And in that realization, something shifted inside me. Something cold and clear and final. I went to my closet and pulled out the wrapped gift. The box was heavier than I remembered, solid and substantial in my hands. Inside was a necklace that would have looked perfect on my mother, that would have complemented her sophisticated style and made her feel beautiful and loved. But my mother didn't deserve to feel loved by me today. Not today, when she had forgotten that I existed. I carried the box downstairs, where my parents were still sitting on the couch, now watching the news. They looked up when I entered the room, and for a moment, I saw something flicker across Mom's face, some dim recognition that there was something different about this interaction. "Sarah?" Dad said. "Everything okay? You look." "I'm fine," I said, holding the wrapped box. "I just wanted to give this to Emma when she gets home." Mom glanced at the elegant wrapping, and I saw a flash of curiosity. "That's a beautiful box. What's the occasion?" "No occasion," I said calmly. "Just something I thought she'd like." "That's sweet of you," Mom said, already turning her attention back to the television. "She'll love that you thought of her." The irony was so sharp it actually made me smile. My mother was praising me for thinking of Emma, on the day that she had forgotten to think of me. I went back upstairs and waited. At 11:45 p.m., I heard Emma come home, 15 minutes past her negotiated curfew but close enough that there wouldn't be consequences. I heard her call goodnight to our parents, heard her climb the stairs, heard her pause outside my door. She knocked softly. "Sarah? Are you awake?" "Come in," I called. Emma opened the door and peeked her head in. Her makeup was slightly smudged from her evening out, but she was glowing with the satisfaction of a perfect date. "I just wanted to say thanks for staying home tonight so Mom and Dad wouldn't worry about both of us being out." I hadn't stayed home for their benefit, but I didn't correct her. "How was dinner?" "Amazing. Tyler is so sweet. He paid for everything, and he walked me to the door, and he's already texting about this weekend." She stepped fully into my room, and I could smell her perfume mixed with the faint scent of restaurant food. "Oh. Mom said you had something for me?" I do. I picked up the wrapped box from my nightstand and held it out to her. Emma's eyes lit up with genuine delight. This was one of the things about my sister that made it hard to hate her completely, her capacity for pure, uncomplicated joy in receiving gifts. She never questioned whether she deserved them or worried about the cost or felt guilty about accepting them. She just felt happy, and that happiness was infectious. Really? What's the occasion? She asked, taking the box. Open it and see. Emma settled onto my bed and carefully unwrapped the box, taking care not to tear the beautiful paper. When she opened the velvet jewelry box, her intake of breath was audible. Oh my God, Sarah. This is gorgeous. She lifted the pearl necklace with reverent hands, and I had to admit it looked beautiful against her skin. The pearls seemed to glow in the lamplight, and the vintage setting complemented her delicate features perfectly. Do you like it? I asked. Like it? I love it. But Sarah, this must have cost a fortune. Why did you? I saw it and thought of you, I said, which was not technically a lie. I had thought of her when I decided to give it to her, even if that thought had been born of anger rather than affection. Emma fastened the necklace around her neck and turned to look at herself in my mirror. She looked stunning, and she knew it. The necklace transformed her from a pretty teenager into someone who looked sophisticated and elegant, like she belonged in the pages of a fashion magazine. This is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever given me, she said, and I could tell she meant it. But Sarah, I feel terrible. I didn't get you anything. It's fine, I said. I don't need anything. Emma studied my reflection in the mirror, and for a moment, I thought I saw something like understanding pass across her face. But then she turned away from the mirror and hugged me impulsively. You're the best sister ever, she said, and the worst part was that she meant that too. After she left my room, I lay in bed listening to the sounds of my family settling in for the night. Mom and Dad's voices murmuring through the walls as they got ready for bed. Emma in the bathroom, probably admiring her new necklace one more time before taking it off. I should have felt satisfied. I had given away the gift that was meant to show my mother how much I loved her, given it to the daughter who already had everything while I had nothing. It should have felt like justice, or revenge, or at least some kind of emotional resolution. Instead, I felt empty. Empty and strangely free. Because lying there in the dark, I realized that giving Emma that necklace wasn't really about hurting my parents or making a point about their favoritism. It was about accepting reality. My parents were never going to see me the way I wanted them to see me. Emma was always going to be their priority. And I could either spend the rest of my life fighting that reality or I could decide what I was going to do with it. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I decided to stop trying to earn love that was never going to be freely given. I decided to stop making myself smaller so that Emma could be bigger. I decided to stop being the understanding daughter, the easy daughter, the daughter who didn't need anything. Most importantly, I decided to start building a life where being forgotten was impossible. I just didn't know yet what that was going to look like. The morning after my 19th birthday, the birthday that never was, I woke up with a clarity I had never experienced before. It was like someone had cleaned windows I didn't know were dirty, and suddenly I could see my life with perfect, painful precision. I came downstairs to find Emma at the kitchen table, wearing the pearl necklace with her school uniform. She looked radiant, and I could tell she'd been waiting for someone to notice her new accessory. Morning, Mom, Emma called cheerfully as our mother bustled around the kitchen, preparing for another day of saving lives and forgetting daughters. Mom glanced over at Emma and did a double take. Emma, that necklace is gorgeous. Where did you get it? Sarah gave it to me last night. Emma touched the pearls with obvious pride. Isn't she amazing? She said she saw it and thought of me. Mom looked at me with surprise, as if she'd forgotten I was capable of thoughtful gestures. Sarah, that was very generous of you. It must have been expensive. It was worth it, I said truthfully. It had been worth it, just not in the way they thought. What was the occasion? Dad asked, looking up from his medical journal. Emma and I exchanged a look, and I saw my sister's face go through a series of micro-expressions as she tried to figure out if there was something she should remember. But the moment passed, and she shrugged. No occasion. Sarah's just the best. Mom beamed at this display of sisterly affection, clearly pleased that her daughters were so close. Dad nodded approvingly before returning to his reading. And just like that, the moment passed without any recognition of what yesterday should have been. But I was done being hurt by their obliviousness. Today, I was taking notes. I watched Emma bask in the attention the necklace brought her throughout the morning. I watched Mom fuss over her appearance and remind her about her after-school activities. I watched Dad slip her lunch money and remind her to text when she got to school safely. And I realized something profound: my family's dynamic wasn't going to change unless I changed it. They had trained themselves to focus on Emma because Emma demanded focus. They had trained themselves to overlook me because I had made it easy to overlook me. But I was done being easy to overlook. That afternoon, instead of going home after my classes at Northwestern, I drove to downtown Chicago and walked into the first real estate office I could find. I was tired of living in a house where my existence was optional, and I had decided to do something about it. The real estate agent, a sharp-dressed woman named Patricia, looked skeptical when I told her I was a college student looking for my own apartment. But when I showed her my bank statements, I had been saving money from my part-time job for 2 years, her attitude shifted completely. Most parents help with the deposit, she mentioned as we discussed options. My parents won't be involved, I said firmly. This is my decision, my responsibility, and my expense. We spent 3 hours looking at studio apartments and one-bedrooms in Lincoln Park and Lakeview. They were small and expensive, but they were also completely mine. No shared spaces with people who forgot I existed. No competing for attention with a sister who had never learned she wasn't the center of the universe. I put a deposit down on a studio apartment in Lincoln Park that same day. It was on the 3rd floor of a converted brownstone, with big windows that faced east and hardwood floors that creaked when you walked on them. The kitchen was tiny but functional, the bathroom was cramped but clean, and the main room was just large enough for a bed, a desk, and a small couch. It was perfect. I signed the lease with my own name, provided my own references, and wrote a check from my own bank account. For the first time in my 19 years, I was doing something that was completely and entirely about me. The apartment would be ready in 2 weeks. That gave me exactly 14 days to figure out how I was going to tell my family I was moving out, and more importantly, how I was going to transform myself from the invisible daughter into someone who couldn't be ignored. I started with school. Northwestern University was a prestigious institution, but I had been coasting through my classes with good grades and no particular direction. I was majoring in English literature because it seemed safe and uncontroversial, not because I was passionate about it. That week, I went to the Career Counseling Center and met with an advisor named Dr. Martinez, a woman in her 50s who had the kind of direct gaze that suggested she didn't have time for nonsense. "What do you want to do with your life, Sarah?" she asked after reviewing my transcripts. "I don't know," I admitted. "I've never really thought about it." "Why not?" The question caught me off guard. Why hadn't I thought about what I wanted to do with my life? I guess I always figured I'd figure it out eventually. Dr. Martinez leaned back in her chair and studied me. "Sarah, you have excellent grades, but your course selection suggests someone who's trying not to make waves. You're taking the safest possible classes, avoiding anything that might challenge you or push you out of your comfort zone." She was right, and we both knew it. "What are you passionate about?" she asked. "What makes you excited? What could you do for hours without getting bored?" I thought about it, really thought about it, for maybe the first time in my life. "I like writing," I said slowly. "And I'm good with technology. I taught myself web design last summer." "Journalism," she suggested. "Digital media? Communications?" "Maybe," I said, but even as I said it, I felt a spark of something I hadn't experienced before. Possibility. Dr. Martinez pulled out a course catalog and started showing me classes I could take next semester. Investigative journalism. Digital media production. Communications law. Marketing and brand management. "These classes will be harder than what you're taking now," she warned. "They'll require more time, more effort, and more risk. You'll have to put yourself out there." "Good," I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. "I'm tired of being safe." That weekend, I changed my major to communications with a focus on digital media. I registered for 4 challenging courses that would push me completely out of my comfort zone. And I started working on the first part of my plan to become impossible to ignore. I had always been good with technology, but I had never done anything with that skill beyond helping classmates with their computer problems. Now, I decided to create something that would showcase exactly what I was capable of. I spent the entire weekend building a website. Not just any website, but a comprehensive digital portfolio that showcased every piece of writing I had ever done, every design project I had completed, every skill I had developed over the years of being the daughter who didn't need attention. As I worked, I realized I had been underestimating myself for years. I was good at things. Really good. I just had never bothered to tell anyone about it because I had been too busy trying not to take up space. The website was sleek, professional, and impressive. It looked like something a graduate student might create, not a 19-year-old who had been coasting through college. But more than that, it looked like something created by someone who mattered, someone who had things to say and skills to offer. I also started a blog. The first post was titled, The Invisible Daughter, Growing Up in the Shadows of a Favorite Child. I wrote about the experience of being overlooked, about the psychology of family dynamics, about what it felt like to love people who forgot you existed. I wrote about my birthday that wasn't, though I was careful not to identify my family specifically. I wrote about the gift I had given away and what it represented. I wrote about the decision to stop fighting for attention and start building a life that commanded respect instead. The post was raw, honest, and beautifully written. I published it on a Tuesday evening and went to bed without checking to see if anyone had read it. By Thursday, it had been shared 300 times and had received over 50 comments from people who had experienced similar family dynamics. By the following Tuesday, it had been shared over 2,000 times and had been picked up by several larger blogs about family relationships and personal development. My phone started ringing with calls from strangers who wanted to tell me their own stories of being invisible children. I received emails from parents who said my post had made them realize they were unconsciously favoring one child over another. I heard from therapists who asked if they could share my post with clients who were struggling with similar issues. For the first time in my life, my voice was being heard by people who wanted to listen. But the most interesting response came from my own family's complete lack of response. Even though my blog was generating significant online attention, even though my name was attached to it, even though people at Northwestern were starting to recognize me as that girl who wrote the Invisible Daughter post, my family remained completely oblivious. It was as if I had created a parallel universe where I mattered and they simply weren't invited to participate in it. 2 weeks after my not birthday, I moved into my apartment. I did it on a Saturday morning while my parents were playing golf and Emma was at cheerleading practice. I packed my belongings into my car and Patricia's friend's truck, left a note on my bed explaining that I had found my own place and would be in touch soon, and walked out of the house where I had spent 19 years being invisible. The note was brief and polite. I thanked them for everything they had provided, explained that I felt ready for independence, and left my new address and phone number. I didn't mention my birthday. I didn't mention feeling forgotten or overlooked. I simply presented my departure as a natural step toward adulthood, which, in a way, it was. Moving into my own space was transformative in ways I hadn't expected. Suddenly, every choice was mine. What to eat for breakfast, when to go to bed, how to spend my evenings, what music to play, how to arrange the furniture, everything was entirely up to me. For the first time in my life, I was the most important person in my own space. I furnished the apartment slowly and carefully, choosing pieces that reflected who I wanted to be rather than who I had been. I bought a beautiful desk where I could write and work on my blog. I invested in a comfortable chair where I could read without interruption. I hung art on the walls that I had chosen because it spoke to me, not because it matched someone else's aesthetic. Most importantly, I created a space where my voice could develop without being overshadowed by anyone else's needs or dramas. My blog continued to grow. I wrote about the experience of moving out, about learning to live alone, about the strange freedom that came from not having to compete for attention. Each post resonated with readers who had felt invisible in their own families, and my audience continued to expand. 3 weeks after moving out, I received my first serious inquiry about freelance writing work. A marketing company had read my blog and wanted to know if I'd be interested in writing content for their website. The pay was better than my bookstore job, and the work was more interesting. I said yes. Within a month, I was writing for 3 different companies and had been able to quit my bookstore job entirely. My income had doubled, my skills were improving rapidly, and I was building a professional reputation in the digital media space. But the most significant change was in how I saw myself. For 19 years, I had defined myself in relation to other people, as Emma's sister, as the Chen's daughter, as the quiet one, as the easy one. Now, I was defining myself by my own achievements, my own goals, my own voice. I was becoming someone who couldn't be overlooked because I was too busy moving forward to wait around for other people's attention. My family's response to my departure was exactly what I had expected, concerned but not alarmed, disappointed but not devastated. Mom called to make sure I was safe and had everything I needed. Dad offered to help with the security deposit if I was struggling financially. Emma texted to say she missed having me around but understood that I wanted my own space. They were supportive in the way good parents are supposed to be when their adult children become independent. But there was no sense of urgency, no desperate attempts to get me to come home, no recognition that my departure represented anything more than a normal developmental milestone. I had successfully become independent without them ever realizing how much their neglect had contributed to my decision to leave. But I wasn't bitter about it anymore. In fact, I was grateful. Their benign neglect had taught me self-reliance. Their focus on Emma had forced me to develop my own sense of worth. Their inability to see me had motivated me to make sure the rest of the world couldn't miss me. As my 20th birthday approached, a birthday I was planning to celebrate properly, with friends I had made through my blog and writing work, I realized that being the invisible daughter had actually been a gift. It had taught me to build something substantial and lasting, rather than relying on external validation. Emma would always be beautiful and charming, but beauty fades and charm becomes less compelling with age. My parents would always be successful doctors, but professional success was just one aspect of a meaningful life. I was building something different. I was building a voice that mattered, a platform that made a difference, and a life that belonged entirely to me. And the best part was, I was just getting started. 6 months after moving out, my blog, The Invisible Daughter, had grown into something I never could have imagined. What started as a single post about being forgotten had evolved into a comprehensive resource for people dealing with family dysfunction, childhood neglect, and the long-term effects of growing up feeling invisible. I was receiving hundreds of emails every week from readers who shared their own stories. Some were heartbreaking, children who had been emotionally abandoned by parents too consumed with work or addiction or their own problems to provide basic emotional support. Others were inspiring, adults who had overcome difficult childhoods to build successful, fulfilling lives. But all of them had one thing in common: they had felt invisible, and my writing helped them feel seen. The blog had also caught the attention of Dr. Susan Whitfield, a family therapist in Chicago who specialized in family systems and sibling dynamics. She reached out to me in November with a proposition that would change the trajectory of my life. "Sarah," she said during our first phone conversation, "your writing about family dynamics is more insightful than what I see in many academic papers. Have you ever considered psychology as a career path?" I was sitting in my apartment, looking out the windows at the fall colors in Lincoln Park, when she called. "I'm studying communications and digital media," I told her. "Which are valuable skills," she said. "But you have an intuitive understanding of family psychology that could be incredibly powerful if you developed it formally. I'd like to propose something." Dr. Whitfield's proposal was ambitious and generous. She wanted me to come work in her practice as a research assistant while finishing my undergraduate degree. I would help her with a longitudinal study she was conducting on the long-term effects of childhood emotional neglect, and she would mentor me in psychology and family therapy. "The study needs someone who understands these dynamics from the inside," she explained. "Someone who can help design interview questions that get to the heart of what these experiences really feel like." The position paid well enough that I could afford my apartment and living expenses while going to school. More importantly, it offered me the chance to turn my personal experience into professional expertise. I said yes immediately. Working with Dr. Whitfield was like getting a master class in understanding my own life. Through her research, I learned about attachment theory, family systems dynamics, and the psychology of child development. I began to understand not just what had happened to me, but why it had happened and how it affected people long term. I also began to understand my parents and Emma with more clarity. My parents weren't monsters, they were busy, successful people who had unconsciously fallen into patterns that served their immediate needs without considering the long-term emotional costs. Emma wasn't a villain, she was a child who had learned to be the center of attention because that strategy worked in our family system. Understanding the psychology behind their behavior didn't excuse it, but it helped me move beyond anger into something more productive, insight. That insight transformed my blog. Instead of just writing about my own experiences, I began writing about the broader patterns I was observing in Dr. Whitfield's research. I wrote about birth order effects, about how parents unconsciously replicate their own childhood dynamics, about the difference between healthy attention and harmful neglect. My audience grew exponentially. I was no longer just writing for other, invisible children, I was writing for parents who wanted to understand their own family dynamics, for therapists who wanted resources to share with clients, for researchers who were studying similar phenomena. By the spring of my sophomore year, The Invisible Daughter had over 50,000 regular readers and had been featured in Psychology Today, Huffington Post, and several academic journals. I was being invited to speak at conferences and workshops about family dynamics and childhood emotional neglect. I was also being interviewed on podcasts and radio shows, where hosts invariably asked about my own family and whether they read my blog. They're aware of it, I would say diplomatically. But we don't really discuss it. This was true, but it was also an understatement. My family was not just aware of my blog, they were completely bewildered by it. The transformation from invisible daughter to semi-public figure had happened so quickly and so thoroughly that they seemed unable to process it. I knew they read the blog because Emma had mentioned it once during one of our infrequent phone calls. "Mom showed me your website," she had said, her voice carefully neutral. "It's really well written." "Thank you," I had replied. "Some of the stories are really sad," she had continued. I had no idea so many people had such difficult childhoods. The irony was so profound I had to sit down. Emma was reading my blog about being the invisible daughter while being completely unable to recognize that I had been writing about our family. It was as if she existed in a parallel universe where our shared childhood had been entirely different from mine. But I wasn't writing for my family anymore. I was writing for the thousands of people who understood exactly what I was talking about because they had lived it themselves. The success of my blog also opened other opportunities. I was offered freelance writing assignments for major publications. I was invited to contribute to academic research projects. I was approached by literary agents who wanted to know if I was interested in writing a book. By my junior year, I was making more money from writing than many people made in traditional full-time jobs. I was building a professional reputation in psychology and digital media. I was developing expertise that would serve me for the rest of my career. Most importantly, I was creating work that mattered to people. During this time, my relationship with my family remained cordial but distant. We talked occasionally, usually when they initiated contact. I visited for major holidays, but briefly and without staying overnight. I was polite, affectionate, and completely independent. They treated me like a successful adult child who had found her own path in life, which was essentially true. There was no conflict, no drama, no confrontations about the past. There was also no deep connection, no intimate understanding, no sense that they really knew who I had become. It was exactly the relationship I had expected and, in many ways, the relationship I wanted. I had learned to love them without needing them, to care about them without depending on them for validation. But the real test of how much I had changed came during my junior year, when Emma got engaged. Tyler, the boyfriend she had been dating since high school, proposed during Christmas break of her senior year. It was exactly the kind of romantic, public proposal that Emma had always dreamed of, at a restaurant she loved, with friends and family present, with a ring that had clearly cost several months' salary. Mom called me immediately after it happened, breathless with excitement. "Sarah. Emma's engaged. Tyler proposed tonight at that sushi restaurant downtown." "That's wonderful," I said, and I meant it. "I'm happy for her. We're going to have an engagement party next month, and then we need to start planning the wedding. Emma wants a June wedding, which only gives us 6 months, but with your father's connections, we should be able to book something beautiful." As Mom talked about venue deposits and dress shopping and guest lists, I realized that Emma's engagement represented the culmination of everything she had been groomed for since childhood. She was getting the fairy tale romance, the expensive wedding, the enthusiastic family support for her major life decisions. 3 years earlier, this would have devastated me. I would have compared Emma's celebration to my forgotten birthday and felt the familiar ache of being less important, less valued, less deserving of attention and support. But now, listening to Mom's excited planning, I felt something entirely different: relief. Relief that I wasn't the daughter whose primary accomplishment was getting engaged at 21. Relief that my worth wasn't tied to my ability to attract a man who could afford an expensive ring. Relief that my future wasn't dependent on my parents' financial support and social connections. Emma was getting everything she had always wanted, and I was genuinely happy for her. But I was also happy that I wanted something completely different. The engagement party was held at our parents' house in February. It was exactly the kind of elegant affair that our mother excelled at organizing: beautiful flowers, excellent food, carefully selected guest list that included all the right people from their social and professional circles. I attended, wearing a dress I had bought with money I had earned myself, carrying a gift I had chosen based on my own relationship with Emma rather than any expectation of reciprocity. At the party, I was introduced to people as Emma's sister, but for the first time, that introduction was often followed by recognition of my own work. "Oh, you're Sarah Chen," said Dr. Patterson, one of Dad's colleagues. "My daughter showed me your blog. She's studying psychology at DePaul and says your writing is brilliant." "Sarah's become quite the writer," Dad said with what seemed like genuine pride. "She's made quite a name for herself." It was the first time I could remember my father expressing pride in my accomplishments to his peers. But instead of feeling vindicated or triumphant, I felt detached. His pride felt nice, but it didn't feel necessary. I no longer needed his validation to know my own worth. During the party, I watched Emma navigate the crowd with the skill of someone who had been the center of attention her entire life. She was gracious and charming, making sure to talk to everyone, expressing genuine gratitude for their presence and their gifts. She was also, I realized, exactly who she had always been. Emma hadn't become the favorite child because she was manipulative or calculating. She had become the favorite child because she was naturally inclined toward the kind of behavior that our parents found easy to love and support. Just as I had been naturally inclined toward the kind of behavior that made me easy to overlook. Neither of us had chosen our roles in the family drama, but both of us had learned to play them well. The difference was that I had eventually chosen to write myself out of that script entirely. Near the end of the party, Emma found me standing on the back patio, getting some air and watching the early February snow fall in the backyard where we had played as children. "Thank you for coming," she said, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders as she joined me outside. "I know family stuff isn't really your thing anymore." "Family stuff is fine," I said. "I'm happy for you, Emma. Tyler seems like a good guy, and you clearly love each other." "We do," she said, touching her engagement ring with the unconscious gesture of someone still getting used to wearing it. "Sarah, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you hate us? Me and Mom and Dad?" The question surprised me with its directness. "No," I said honestly. "I don't hate you. But you're different now. You're so independent. You never need anything from us." "I never needed much from you," I pointed out. "That's not new. But it feels different. It feels like you don't want anything from us." I considered how to answer this. "I think that's probably true," I said finally. "I've learned to want things that you can't give me." Emma was quiet for a moment, processing this. "Is that because of us? Because we weren't, I don't know, better family to you?" It was the closest anyone in my family had ever come to acknowledging that our relationships might not have been entirely healthy. "It's not about blame," I said carefully. "It's about growing up and figuring out what kind of life you want to build. But some of the things you write about on your blog, they sound like our family." So she had recognized herself in my writing. I had wondered if she would. "Some of them are inspired by our family," I admitted. "But I try to write about universal experiences, not specific people." "The birthday story," she said quietly. "The one about the forgotten birthday and the gift. That was about your 19th birthday, wasn't it?" I looked at my sister in the dim light from the patio doors. She was 22 now, engaged, planning a wedding, building an adult life. But in that moment, she looked younger, uncertain in a way I had rarely seen her. Yes, I said. That was about my 19th birthday. I'm sorry, she said, and her voice broke a little. I'm sorry we forgot. I'm sorry I laughed. I'm sorry I didn't realize. Emma, I said gently, you were 19. You were a teenager focused on your own life. That's normal. But you're my sister. I should have remembered. Maybe. But you didn't, and that's okay. It taught me something important. What? That I couldn't depend on other people to remember that I matter. I had to remember it myself. We stood there in the cold for a few more minutes, watching the snow fall. Then Emma hugged me, impulsively and tightly. I hope we can be close again someday, she said. When all this wedding stuff is over and things calm down. We're fine, Emma, I assured her. We're just different than we used to be. And that was true. We were different. I was different. But different didn't mean broken, and it didn't mean irreparable. It just meant that I had learned to build a life that didn't depend on other people's ability to see me. As I drove home to my apartment that night, I reflected on how much had changed since my forgotten 19th birthday. I had gone from being the invisible daughter to being someone with a platform, a voice, and a career that mattered to thousands of people. But more importantly, I had gone from being someone who needed external validation to survive to being someone who could provide her own sense of worth. The best revenge, I realized, wasn't making my family feel guilty about how they had treated me. The best revenge was building a life so fulfilling and meaningful that their approval became irrelevant. And that's exactly what I had done. The call came on a Tuesday morning in March, 3 weeks after Emma's engagement party. I was in Dr. Whitfield's office, reviewing interview transcripts for our research project, when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Is this Sarah Chen? Asked a professional-sounding woman with a slight accent. Yes, this is Sarah. My name is Dr. Elena Rodriguez from the American Psychological Association. I'm calling about your blog and your research work with Dr. Whitfield. We'd like to discuss a rather extraordinary opportunity with you. Dr. Rodriguez explained that the APA was launching a new initiative focused on childhood emotional neglect and family trauma. They had been following my blog and Dr. Whitfield's research, and they wanted to offer me something unprecedented for someone my age, a position as a research consultant and public advocate for their campaign. The position would involve speaking at conferences, consulting on research protocols, and serving as a public voice for people who have experienced childhood emotional neglect, she explained. We've never offered this kind of position to someone without a graduate degree, but your combination of personal experience, writing ability, and research background is exactly what we need. The salary they offered was more than I had ever imagined making. But more than that, it was recognition from the most prestigious organization in psychology that my voice and my experience mattered. There is one component of the position that I should mention, Dr. Rodriguez continued. We would want you to speak at our annual convention in August. It's our largest event of the year, with over 15,000 attendees, and your presentation would be broadcast live to psychology professionals around the world. 15,000 psychology professionals. A live broadcast to an international audience. It was the kind of platform that established researchers spent decades trying to achieve. I'd be honored to accept, I said, trying to keep the excitement out of my voice. After I hung up, Dr. Whitfield looked at me with the expression of a mentor whose student had just exceeded every expectation. Sarah, she said, do you understand what just happened? The APA has essentially offered you a national platform to advocate for invisible children everywhere. This is unprecedented. Over the next several months, I threw myself into preparing for the convention presentation. The APA wanted me to speak about the psychology of the invisible child, understanding and healing from childhood emotional neglect. It would be a 45-minute keynote address that would synthesize research, personal experience, and practical applications for therapists. I also used this time to make a decision I had been considering for months. I was going to write a book. Several literary agents had approached me about turning my blog into a book, but I had always felt like I wasn't ready, like I didn't have enough distance from my own experience to write about it with the objectivity it deserved. But now, with 3 years of distance and a growing understanding of the psychology behind family dynamics, I felt ready to tell the story properly. The book would be part memoir, part psychology guide, part resource for people dealing with similar experiences. I wanted to write something that would help both the people who had been invisible children and the parents who might be unconsciously creating invisible children of their own. I spent the summer writing, researching, and preparing for what I knew would be the most important professional moment of my life so far. During this time, my family's response to my increasing professional recognition was interesting. My parents were proud in the way that parents are proud when their children achieve something they don't entirely understand but recognize as impressive. They would mention my work to their friends and colleagues, but always with a slight air of bewilderment, as if they couldn't quite figure out how their quiet, undemanding daughter had become someone people paid attention to. Emma's response was more complex. She was genuinely supportive of my success, but I could tell that having a sister who was becoming professionally prominent was challenging for someone who had always been the family star. She was still the beautiful, charming daughter getting married in June, but suddenly I was the daughter with the impressive career and public recognition. It wasn't that she resented my success, exactly. It was more that my success changed the family dynamic in ways that she didn't quite know how to navigate. For the first time in our lives, I was getting more attention than she was. In June, I attended Emma's wedding. It was everything she had dreamed of, a beautiful ceremony at a historic venue outside Chicago, with 300 guests, an elegant reception, and enough flowers to stock a small greenhouse. Emma looked radiant in her designer dress, Tyler looked appropriately handsome and nervous, and my parents glowed with the satisfaction of having successfully launched their favorite daughter into an appropriate marriage. I was genuinely happy for Emma. But I was also acutely aware of how different my life trajectory was from hers. At 22, she was becoming a wife and planning to start a family. At 22, I was preparing to address the largest gathering of psychology professionals in the world about childhood emotional trauma. Neither path was better than the other, but they represented fundamentally different approaches to building a meaningful life. During the reception, I found myself in conversations with relatives and family friends who wanted to know about my work. For the first time at a family event, I was interesting to the adults present, not just politely tolerated as Emma's older sister. Sarah's become quite the expert on family psychology, Dad told his brother during dinner. She's speaking at a major psychology conference next month. Really? Uncle Bob looked at me with new interest. What kind of psychology? I study how family dynamics affect child development, I explained. Particularly how children respond when they don't receive adequate emotional attention from their parents. That sounds important, he said. Too many parents today are too busy to really focus on their kids. I smiled politely and agreed, while internally noting the irony of having this conversation at a table full of people who had collectively overlooked me for most of my childhood. But I wasn't bitter about it anymore. Their recognition now felt nice, but it wasn't necessary. I had learned to create my own sense of worth, and their validation was just a pleasant bonus rather than a desperate need. 2 months later, in August, I stood backstage at the American Psychological Association convention in San Diego, preparing to deliver the most important speech of my life. I was wearing a professional black dress that I had bought specifically for the occasion, and I was carrying note cards that represented months of preparation and years of lived experience. Dr. Rodriguez introduced me to the audience of 15,000 psychology professionals from around the world. Dr. Sarah Chen, she said, using the honorary title that the APA had granted me for the purposes of the conference, is a researcher, writer, and advocate whose work on childhood emotional neglect has transformed how we understand family trauma. Please welcome her to speak about the psychology of the invisible child. The applause was thunderous as I walked onto the stage. Looking out at an audience of 15,000 people who were there specifically to hear what I had to say was surreal and overwhelming and absolutely perfect. I began my speech with the story of my 19th birthday. Not the sanitized version I had told in interviews, but the real version, with all the pain and confusion and eventual realization that had followed. 3 years ago, I said into the microphone, my voice carrying clearly through the enormous auditorium, my family forgot my birthday. Not overlooked it, not miscommunicated about it, not been too busy to celebrate it properly. They forgot it completely. And when I gave my sister the gift I had bought for my mother, she thanked me for being thoughtful. The audience was completely silent, absorbed in the story. That experience taught me something crucial about childhood emotional neglect. It's not always dramatic or obvious. Sometimes it's as simple as being so consistently overlooked that your own family forgets you were born. I went on to discuss the research Dr. Whitfield and I had conducted, the patterns we had observed in families where children became emotionally invisible, and the long-term effects of growing up feeling unseen and unimportant. But I also talked about resilience, about how some children respond to emotional neglect by developing extraordinary self-reliance and empathy for others who feel invisible. The invisible child often becomes an adult who has learned to see other people with unusual clarity, I explained. Because they know what it feels like to be overlooked, they become skilled at noticing and validating others who are being overlooked. I talked about my blog, about the thousands of people who had shared their stories of growing up invisible, about the community that had formed around the shared experience of childhood emotional neglect. These individuals have taught me that being invisible to your family doesn't have to mean being invisible to the world, I said. Sometimes the people who were overlooked as children become the adults who make sure other people feel seen. The presentation concluded with practical applications for therapists working with clients who had experienced childhood emotional neglect, and resources for parents who wanted to make sure they weren't unconsciously creating invisible children of their own. When I finished speaking, the audience gave me a standing ovation that lasted for several minutes. As I looked out at 15,000 psychology professionals on their feet, applauding work that had grown directly out of my experience of being forgotten, I felt a profound sense of completion. I had taken the most painful experience of my childhood and transformed it into something that could help thousands of other people feel less alone. After the speech, I was approached by dozens of therapists, researchers, and other professionals who wanted to discuss my work. I was interviewed by psychology journals, invited to collaborate on research projects, and asked to consider pursuing a doctoral degree in psychology. But the most meaningful response came in the form of emails I received over the following weeks from people who had watched the live broadcast online. Hundreds of invisible children, now adults, wrote to thank me for giving voice to an experience that they had never seen acknowledged in such a public forum. For the first time in my life, wrote one woman, I felt like someone understood exactly what it was like to grow up feeling like I didn't matter to my own family. Your speech helped me realize that my childhood wasn't normal, and that it wasn't my fault, wrote another. Most moving of all, I heard from parents who said my presentation had helped them recognize patterns in their own families that they wanted to change. After watching your speech, I realized I'd been unconsciously favoring my younger daughter, wrote one mother. I'm starting family therapy to make sure both my children feel equally valued. The book I had been writing was published 6 months later. The Invisible Daughter, A Guide to Understanding and Healing from Childhood Emotional Neglect, became a bestseller within weeks of its release. It was reviewed in major publications, recommended by therapists around the country, and translated into 12 languages. More importantly, it became a resource for people who had grown up feeling invisible and for parents who wanted to avoid creating invisible children. The success of the book led to more speaking engagements, more research opportunities, and eventually, an offer to host my own podcast about family psychology and childhood trauma recovery. By my 25th birthday, a birthday I celebrated with friends I had made through my work, in the apartment I had bought with money I had earned from writing about my experiences, I had built a career that was meaningful, profitable, and entirely my own. But the most satisfying part wasn't the professional recognition or the financial success. It was the knowledge that I had taken the experience of being invisible and used it to help other people feel seen. My family's response to my success was exactly what I had expected. They were proud of me in a distant, polite way. They mentioned my achievements to their friends and colleagues. They read my book, though we never discussed it in detail. They watched my presentations online and told people that their daughter was doing important work. But they never really understood the connection between the work I was doing and the childhood that had inspired it. They never quite grasped that I had built my career on the foundation of their emotional neglect, or that my success was partly a response to their failure to see me clearly. And that was okay. I had stopped needing them to understand me years ago. On my 25th birthday, as I sat in my beautiful apartment surrounded by friends who valued me, reading congratulatory messages from colleagues around the world, I thought about the 19-year-old girl who had cried alone in her childhood bedroom after being forgotten by her family. That girl had thought her pain was proof of her worthlessness. She had believed that being invisible meant being unimportant. She had been wrong about both things. Her pain had been proof of her humanity, not her worthlessness. And being invisible to her family had taught her how to make sure other people never felt invisible to her. The gift I had given Emma on my forgotten birthday had been meant as a small act of rebellion, a way of redirecting love that wasn't being reciprocated. But in retrospect, it had been the first step in a much larger journey toward building a life where other people's inability to see me was irrelevant. Because I had learned to see myself clearly, and I had used that clarity to help thousands of other people do the same. The invisible daughter had become impossible to ignore, not by demanding attention, but by creating work that mattered too much to overlook. And that, I realized, was the best possible revenge, transforming your deepest wound into your greatest gift to the world. On my 28th birthday, I received an invitation from Northwestern University to deliver the commencement address for the graduating class of 2025. Standing at the podium in front of thousands of graduates, I told them the story that had become my life's work. 9 years ago, I began, my family forgot my birthday. Today, I want to tell you how that forgotten birthday became the most important day of my life, because it taught me that sometimes the people who can't see your worth are simply showing you that you need to build a life where their vision is irrelevant. In the audience, I spotted my parents and Emma, who looked proud but puzzled by how their quiet daughter had become someone addressing graduating classes. As I concluded my speech, I offered the graduates the advice that had transformed my life. Don't wait for other people to see your worth before you start building something worthwhile. Don't spend your energy trying to become visible to people who have trained themselves not to see you. Instead, use that energy to create work that matters, to build relationships with people who value what you have to offer, and to become so authentically yourself that the right people can't help but notice. The applause was thunderous and purposeful. These graduates weren't just applauding a speech, they were applauding the possibility that their own challenges could be transformed into sources of strength. After the ceremony, my family approached me with congratulations. As we posed for photos, Emma whispered, "I'm so proud of you, Sarah. I always knew you were special." I smiled and thanked her, though I knew that wasn't quite true. She had known I was different, but had never understood that different could mean special rather than invisible. The real gift wasn't that my family had finally learned to see me. The real gift was that I had learned to see myself clearly enough that their vision no longer mattered. I had become impossible to ignore, not by demanding attention, but by creating something too valuable to overlook. The invisible daughter had learned to make herself impossible to miss, not by changing who she was, but by fully becoming who she had always been meant to be. And in doing so, she had discovered that being overlooked by the wrong people was often the first step toward being truly seen by the right ones.